really happens when a reviewer sits down to read your grant proposal? You might be surprised. Hello, I'm Maren Bass, and today I'd like to share a few tips with you that can dramatically up-level your grant-seeking success. Now, once upon a time, I used to imagine that when a reviewer sat down to read my proposals, they were doing so under the best of all possible circumstances. They're fresh, they're alert, they're fully engaged, they're enthusiastic and ready to read through each lovingly crafted sentence one at a time, beginning to end, following my expert step-by-step guidance to the ultimate and inevitable conclusion that they must and they will say an enthusiastic yes to this proposal. Then I became a grant reviewer, and boy did I learn fast that what really happens at the review desk is never under the most ideal circumstances. In fact, you might as well assume just the opposite. Reviewers are doing their review work under not the best, but under the worst of all possible circumstances. Now, I call this the 12-12-12 scenario, and understanding the 12-12-12 scenario radically transformed the way I think about grant proposals, and it can change the way you think about grant proposals too from now on. Here's how it goes. Tomorrow morning at 8 o'clock, your reviewer is going to be meeting with her team to go through the proposals that they're considering. It is now 12 o'clock midnight, and she's just sitting down to review the proposals that they're going to be discussing. Okay? Now, she's already put in a 12-hour work day, okay? So you can imagine she's not coming to this fresh from a day at the spa. And your proposal is not the first one she's going to be looking at, or the second one, or even the third one. In fact, there are 11 other proposals that she needs to get through before she gets to yours, which is the 12th one in the stack. Whew. Now, the question now becomes, given the challenging 12-12-12 scenario, what does your proposal need to look like? What does it need to do in order not only to keep that poor reviewer from falling asleep before she hits the bottom of the second page, but to get him or her so excited about what you're offering that they can't wait to get to that review team meeting tomorrow morning and be your champion? In other words, how does someone who is about to fall asleep instead fall in love with your proposal? Now, to answer this question, there's one key factor that I want to focus on today, and that is respect for the reader's mental energy. Now, have you ever bought something at the store and brought it home all excited and then had to work so hard to get the package open that you were tempted to give up completely? Maybe you even did. I know I have. Too many proposals are like that impossible packaging. The reviewer just has to work too darn hard to get to the good stuff inside. Now, the fact is, each of us brings a limited amount of mental energy to any task we're doing, and the proposal reviewer is no different. Simply put, the more mental energy the proposal reviewer needs in order to find his way through the packaging, the less they'll have to invest in the great ideas and the information that you want to share. And by the way, the harder they have to work, the grumpier they get in the process, and a grumpy reviewer is never a good thing. So what can you do to keep your proposal from getting in its own way? Here are my top 3 tips for successfully navigating the 12-12-12 scenario. 12-12-12 tip number 1, keep sentences short. Now, this means an average of 17 words up to a maximum of 32. Think about it. Periods are like rest stops for the reader, and if you don't provide them often enough, the reader's eyes will just skip over to the next one, and that means they'll be skipping important information in the meantime. Longer sentences also tend to be more complex, and they take more energy and focused attention to navigate. Don't make your reader work so hard. Now, I want to be clear, we're not talking about writing that's abrupt or choppy. You can and should vary the length of your sentences. Just be sure you keep the average around 17 and a maximum of 32. And by the way, can you ever use a one-word sentence in a word? Sure. 12-12-12 scenario tip number 2, choose simpler, more familiar words. Now, believe it or not, grant proposal is not the place to trot out all the vocabulary words you learned so diligently in 7th grade English. Every word that's more complex than it needs to be, even a tiny little bit, drains a little bit of mental energy for even the most intelligent reader. And those little bits add up quickly to writing that's sloggy and boggy and dense. So if you have a choice of 2 or 3 words that mean exactly the same thing, and you almost always do, choose the simpler, more familiar one. Okay? Here's a couple of examples. Detrimental. Is there a simpler, more familiar word that means exactly the same thing? How about harmful? Okay, number 2, verification. Simpler, more familiar word that means exactly the same thing? Let's try proof. How about facilitate? This is a tricky one, and it's a great example of how longer words can actually be less precise than the shorter ones. This last one, facilitate, can mean teach. It can mean lead. It can mean coordinate. These are all very different meanings. It's better to choose the simpler, more familiar word, teach or lead or coordinate, that conveys exactly what you want to communicate. This saves the reader from second guessing, possibly misunderstanding, and it saves mental energy too. Our final top 3 12-12-12 tip is break up your text. There's nothing more daunting or off-putting to a reviewer than to confront a page of solid block of unbroken text from top to bottom. It's exhausting just to look at, and it tends to elicit the reaction, oh boy, here we go, which is a far cry from, oh boy, here we go. Fortunately, there are a few easy fixes that will instantly make your proposal much more visually appealing. Number 1, use shorter paragraphs. This is the simplest one of all. Instead of paragraphs that run 10 or 12 lines long or even longer, break them into paragraphs of 5 or 6 lines each. Also, use headings. Use headings and bold-sided headings to break your text up further. It also provides signposts for the reader, makes your information easier to absorb. And lists are wonderful. If I have 3 points I want to make or 3 pieces of information that I want to share, I will almost always break them out of paragraph form and put them into bulleted or numbered lists, just as I have here, which makes for a much more appealing page layout. And just as important, lists make it less likely that the reader will miss important information. Now, by the way, I know we don't always have these formatting options available to us when we're working on an online proposal, which makes it all the more important that we help conserve the reader's mental energy by paying close attention to tip number 1, prefer shorter sentences, and tip number 2, choose simpler, more familiar words. So what's the bottom line? Simply this: remember the 12-12-12 scenario and respect the reader's energy by writing to express, not to impress. Your writing should be transparent. That means your writing should help the beauty and the strength and the power of your proposal to shine through purely and clearly and compellingly. Nothing should stand between the reader and the great ideas you want to communicate. That's it for now. I'm Maren Bass, wishing you happy grant seeking.